It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us to talk about St. John Paul II is the author and illustrator of the children's book, The Story of St. John Paul II, A Boy Who Became Pope, Fabiola Garza. Thanks for being here.
Oh, no, thank you.
So you actually are an illustrator at Disney. We mentioned this earlier on the show. Do you have a favorite Disney movie or a favorite project that you've worked on?
Oh, well, one of my favorite Disney movies is The Lion King, which I think is not an uncommon...
the original, right?
Yeah. The one from 1994.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, not the new one. The animated one from 1994. And, oh, man, I've worked on so many projects. I recently got to do my own version of the characters from the Haunted Mansion in Walt Disney World.
Huh.
And that was really, really fun to do. I mean, the artwork is eventually going to be on merchandise for the attraction, but I just got done with that recently, and it was just a lot of fun to do because the characters are so, iconic, but so different. So I really enjoyed doing that.
So of all of the saints and famous people, why did you want your first book to be about John Paul II? What has he meant to you or your faith?
Well, I didn't go in thinking I'm going to publish a book and it's going to be about him. Originally, it began as a project for school my senior year in college. I took a class called Picture and Word, which is about illustrating for children's books, but also writing children's books. So I think I immediately knew I wanted to do one about a saint. I think it was between Saint Therese of Lisieux and John Paul II. But yeah, no, at the time I had been learning about his early life, and I just had no idea he had gone through so many things before his papacy. And I just found his story so inspiring that, I don't know, I came at it, I think, from a more personal angle, where there was something about him that really was changing me and inspiring me. So I wrote the very first version of the book my last year in college, illustrated it. The original illustrations were very, very different. And yeah, it was actually even twice as long.
Really?
Yeah, it was too long. But I tried publishing it right after college. But yeah, I think there were no takers. So I did my internship, took a job, and then after I was working for a video game company at the time, and the company went bankrupt. So I was actually freelancing for 2 years, so I had a lot of extra time. And I decided I would sort of rewrite the book and re-illustrate it and do and pitch it again to different publishing companies. And I wrote a ton of query letters, and eventually Pauline Books and Media picked it up. So that was really exciting.
So what made you want to kind of highlight his younger years, his youth?
I think it was because there was such a spirit of hope in him, despite all of the very tragic things that he went through. I mean, he lost all his family members, his mom, his brother, his dad, by the time I think he was 19, which is just a huge, huge loss. And he's known so much for his joy and empathy and hope that I was like, well, how on earth, how did he keep that hope? How was he able to be joyful despite all of those tragic things? And I mean, he went through World War II in his country, and then communism, lost so many of his friends. And knowing that what held him up was his love for God and his love for Jesus was just something that inspired me and intrigued me so much. So I think it was partly that.
Yeah. Anything that you think you've noticed whenever you're doing the research for it, writing it, that was a particularly positive influence on him with all that tragedy? What gave him that hope? How did he stay faithful?
Yeah, well, I know that when he was little, his dad was a very faithful man. He taught him how to pray. He also had a little bit when he was older, a mentor who taught him how to hope amidst like the suffering. And I think he spent a lot of time pondering how we can hope and love God amidst some suffering. And I think it's also, he just loved people so much that I think the fact that he was able to continually make friendships and love people despite those he lost, I think was just a really great gift that he had. And he loved helping people develop their love for God. So I think that was partly what kept him joyful, the fact that he loved people. And the fact that despite everything, more than he loved everything else, he loved God the most.
We're talking with Fabiola Garza, and the book is a children's book called The Story of St. John Paul II, a boy who became Pope. And you talk about loving God the most. That's kind of a theme throughout the book. You kind of frame it about who do you love the most. Why did you choose to kind of work around that theme?
Because I think that's the way he lived his life. First off, just in his prayer life, the way people described the way he prayed was just this sort of enormous focus on the Lord. But I think because he was a man who loved deeply a lot of people, and he was challenged to sometimes let go of the things he loved. And the thing that I think, like in his prayer life, I think he's mentioned it before in the Bible, when you see Jesus ask Peter over and over again if he loves him more than these, more than everything. I think that's how John Paul sort of responded to God, that he loved God most of all, and that was how he lived his life. So when things happen, good or bad, reminding yourself, like, out of everything you're giving in this life, what do you love the most? And that helps direct your life immensely, because that means that God is the center of your life. And that's something that really helped me. Just seeing him love God the most in his life helped me try to do the same in mine and to love him the same way.
Yeah. One of the things I like about this is I think we read saint stories, and maybe we read saint stories to our kids, but they're adult stories almost always. It's what the saint did as an adult, because that's really what made them a saint, was these big sacrifices that they did in responding to a call, their vocation as an adult. But to kind of bring this down to the children level and throw, on the cover, you've got this little boy who would become Pope sitting by a tree. This is like every kid sits down by a tree. It's like, this is something I can relate to, and then see the path that he chose of loving. I think is so helpful for us to show our kids that this is something that you can do too. You can become a saint by just answering God with a yes, every time he asks you to do something. So have you heard any stories of people reading these to their kids and inspiring them, or people being inspired by this message?
Well, actually, one of my favorite things that I get is when people send in pictures of their kids with the book. And sometimes what they mention is, like, if the kids are too young to reread the whole thing, or, they're too young to pay attention for too long, they really enjoy the pictures and seeing, like, the progression of this little boy who they, like you said, they can relate to.
Yeah.
And that this boy had a normal childhood and everything, and that ended up being somebody that everybody knows. I think it's just, like you said, it helps them relate more to him and make them seem not so, like, otherworldly or far away. I think it makes them, like, more possible, because I think, like, you're right, that's how we meet all the saints, like, once they've been saints. Like, we don't know how their heart was formed beforehand that helps them become great. It's one of those things that I realized I didn't have a lot when I was little, or if I did, it was more of a biography. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
he was born here, he did this. There wasn't this, like, the emotions, you know what I mean? The human emotions that saints have, their own struggles. Like, a lot of the times we don't realize, like, oh, they were human,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. And the pictures that go along with it, like you said, it really makes it a great thing for families and for kids to look through, to read through when they're able. What age range is the book for?
That's funny. Well, I did have that issue because I originally just wrote it obviously for children, and I couldn't. Part of me is like, I know children's books are only supposed to be like 13 pages long, but I just had so much to say that and so much longer. So I did actually go back and forth to the editor so that we could have like a more well thought out age range. So I would be like 7 to 11. But even if they're younger, I always recommend parents to read just like a couple pages a day. You know, like you can cut it up, because obviously kids don't have, like, they're not necessarily going to sit still for the whole thing in one sitting because it is long.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say it's like an older kid level.
Well, we've got it at home. We love it, and we've given it out as gifts too. It's such a great book. Where should we send people to get a copy of it?
It is both on Amazon and on Pauline Books and Media online. So either place you can find them.
All right. Again, it's The Story of St. John Paul II, a boy who became Pope. Fabiola Garza is the author and illustrator. Thanks so much for sharing just a little bit about the life of St. John Paul II. Appreciate it.
Oh, no, of course.